Out of theater, returning to car, immediate reaction. Not bad. Not great. Didn't touch me deeply, but not bad. Very enjoyable at the surface level. And maybe one level deeper. And possibly 2 levels deeper. But that 4, 5, 6 levels deep thing wasn't quite there. I would argue most of his movies don't quite penetrate to that level because he designs them as a facade, a living facade, like a play. I'll say there's moments that penetrate a little bit deeper, but most of it's kind of hanging in the, surface to a couple layers deep. But at those layers, the layers of comedy, witticisms, observations, it was there. There was a lot there. And then everything else, the deeper you look at it, the more structured it feels, perhaps to a fault, certainly by design. And not always my cup of tea, because I like movies to transport me, whereas this, the way Anderson writes and directs, is meant to, entertain, probing without penetrating, or perhaps probing, not always penetrating deeply, which is safe. He probes at a safe level and occasionally goes for a deeper stab. And sometimes those things are abrupt, like in Royal Tenenbaums when the attempted suicide scene. Suddenly he'll just smack you with a fish like that. There's perhaps a couple moments here which you go from the commonplace to then the shockingly lewd or the shockingly audacious. So that's in his bag of tricks, to lull you along and then suddenly try to jolt you, almost like a comedic horror film, like a horror film trope, like a pop-out. He does kind of pop-outs, but in comedy, if that makes sense. Clearly talented people all around doing good work. A surprise for me was Jeffrey Wright, who I don't like in movies. I think he's technically a good actor and he can deliver the goods, but for me, he always seemed a bit cheap or self-aware or something. But I actually thought he had a great monologue in this. You'll know the one when you see it. And all around great scene. So he gets my most improved award, Jeffrey Wright. Slightly disappointed award goes to Jason Schwartzman, who is the male lead in many ways, probably in terms of screen time. And it could be argued, due to the nature of the film, that he played it right. But it could also be argued that he was slightly miscast and that he was used because they have a relationship and Anderson likes him and, the cohesiveness of the Anderson troupe. But for me, I could have used, I'm not sure who, I'll have to think about what actor I might have placed in that role that I think could have played that range. There's a gruffness to that character that's meant to be there that I think Schwartzman is a little too sweet. I think he's too charming and cool of a guy to play some of that gruffness, and perhaps not, it's just not in his wheelhouse. I don't want to say he's not talented enough of an actor, because I'm sure there's plenty of roles he could play. For all intents and purposes, Anderson probably got exactly what he wanted here. He probably wanted this sort of borderline theatrical take on this character. Once again, surface level deep portrayal of someone with a gruffness to them that perhaps might be intentional. It's a tough movie to analyze because Anderson designs his movies sometimes in a way that almost makes them critic proof. Like he dares you to criticize the movie, because then he can always have a comeback and say, well, it's meant to be a facade. It's meant to be surface level deep. You're not getting it. So it comes down to personal taste of, are you down for what he's serving you? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. And I think this movie sometimes works brilliantly and sometimes is merely fine. I was a touch bored at times, which I do feel is the failure of a writer-director. If we're to start, throwing darts at it. if the goal is to entertain above all else, then the movie does not always entertain at a high level. It's always a pleasant movie to watch, and there's always something good that's around the corner. For instance, on rewatches, there's a lot to look forward to. But in fact, it probably will improve on rewatches because you know exactly what it is and what it isn't, and you can look forward to the strengths. And as someone who loves to rewatch movies, I'm always looking for that in a film, something that's going to grow, something that's jokes that are going to be funny the fourth and fifth time, as the great comedies are, including many that he's made. Most importantly, Grand Budapest, I find extremely rewatchable. Stiff, but rewatchable. I mean, that Grand Budapest, as a counterpoint to this one, is a higher achievement because it has his dollhouse play aesthetic, but without giving itself over completely to the self-awareness that that's what it is. It also exists as a story within that dollhouse without breaking the fourth wall. This movie very specifically wants to break the fourth wall. And that's one of those things where I think it gets away with it, and there's wonderful moments that come out of that. But on the other hand, it's just a non-traditional story. It's not the sort of story of a hero's journey in the traditional sense, where you emotionally invest in characters that then take you through a journey. It's more like you need to find a way to emotionally invest in the facade of the picture and find your meaning within that structure. Find your meaning within that, the architecture of it, and try to reverse engineer some of it and say, oh, I won't spoil anything, but the character of X, the fact that this person from this perspective is saying this thing, having broken the fourth wall, what does that mean about the writer of this piece? At what level, do we go to the fifth wall? Obviously, the movie's being written. So when a writer is writing about characters breaking the fourth wall into like another dimension, basically, what is the writer saying to us about his own experience that he's essentially writing about a writer writing something? And if I were to analyze it, there's a lot of straight up Freudian stuff going on here, and either that's the joke or that's the truth. And Anderson has made some incredible revelations here. Now I'm curious about looking into his personal life of late. Not that he's like tabloid fodder. I don't know how far I'd have to dig to find out information about him and his, romantic life and, other things. It's obviously a personal film, but Anderson's a joker. He's a big joker. So, is the joke on us? I don't know. More information is needed. But without leaving aside the fifth wall now, just to talk about the movie, it works on all the levels that it wants to work. It gets a good review from me, maybe a B+ in terms of difficulty and execution. Well done. Overall, movies I've ever seen, it's feeling more like a C+, because entertainment value is big for me. So after one viewing, I wouldn't give it a high mark like that. In terms of Anderson's filmography, I would say it's kind of in the B tier, mainly because the A tier is so A+. He has such an A tier. Yeah, that's what I'm feeling. I'm feeling a 7 on the film overall, but that's an IMDb 7. That's a very respectful 7. Yeah, Asteroid City.